I tell you what the dictionary says. It is to steal small item little by little and habitually. This is what it means. This is something the believer must not do. And the use of this word brings us further into considering the depth of this law. It is interesting that this word is mentioned only 3 times in the scriptures. You know where else it is mentioned? With Ananias and Sapphira. You know, when Peter, it says in verse 3 of Acts 5, he says, but Peter says, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie against the Spirit of God by pilfering, right? By keeping back, same word, part of the price of the land. You know, when Deuteronomy 24:15 says that each day you shall give him his wages, the principle covers all facets of our lives. Let's not take anything from anybody, especially from God. Give him what belongs to him, our tithes to God. And what belongs to others, you give them. Theft is a serious problem. We see that the Spirit of God says through Paul in Ephesians 4:28, let him who steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. And it is in Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 to 16, by the way, where one finds a very, very strange law. One that seems to be out of place, but I want to tell you it flows with the rest. Here is the case of 2 brothers living together. One is single, the other one is married. The one who's married dies. And so the law states that the single brother should now marry the widow. And if he refuses, the whole procedure should be followed, among which the woman takes a sandal from his foot in front of everyone and she spits on him. That's quite odd, but there's something beautiful in there. Let's read a couple of verses and see what is happening. Just want to tell you there's so much than what meets the eye at first glance. Let's start with verse 7, verses to 10. It says, but if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name for his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of the city shall call him and speak to him, but if he persists and says, I do not want to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit on his face, and answers and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal removed. Now, first what it says is that the man who refuses to marry his brother's widow, then the whole affair becomes a public one. Everybody knows about it. She goes, it says, to see the elders and the judges in the city, verse 7. And if these are involved, I want to tell you that the whole community is involved. So it's a big deal. And verse 8 indicates that these elders would try to convince the brother to take her as a wife, because we read of the word, if he persists and says, I do not want to take her, that indicates to us that there was a strong conversation going on. And if he persists in refusing, while facing the judges, and I'm sure the whole community that would gather around, she takes again her sandal and spits on his face. That's quite a story. How can we understand what is happening here? What is the purpose of this law? And why humiliate the man in such a manner? This is not all, by the way, because this man, if he refuses, he's stigmatized for life. This man will be remembered in verse 9 as the man who will not build up his brother's house. And as if it was not enough to add insult to injury, another name is given to him in verse 10. He will be called forever the house of him who had the sandal removed. Why so much on this matter? You know, on the surface we can say that the whole thing is designed so that the man does not refuse to take his brother's widow as a wife. The reason was not only so that the dead brother's name will be perpetuated, but I believe that this is another attempt to protect the woman here. This young widow, if not married by the brother, will be out of the house, and this time will surely find it hard to find another husband. having been already married. But more than that, a wife did not inherit the husband's wealth. She will have to go out of the house empty-handed. And I believe that this law is given for the protection of the woman. This, I believe, is the whole intent of the law. It made it so difficult for the man that really had no choice but to marry her. You know, we already learned from the complaint of the daughters of Zelophehad. Do you remember? In Numbers 27. We learned that the inheritance of a man who dies goes to a male, never to the daughters. So if you remember, their father died, and since he didn't have any sons, they were about to give all his money, all his goods to a distant cousin. But the daughters had courage, and what they did, they went to God. They called on Moses, and they said, "Can you ask God if this is fair?" You know, and I'm sure, you know, they took the risk to have fires, the fires of God to consume them, as we say it in the Torah. So in the text, Moses does not say a word. He goes in the tent of meeting and returns after a while, and I'm sure to the surprise of all the leaders and the congregation whom we learn were at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And we read, verse 7, God says to Moses, "The daughters of Zelophehad speaks what is right." You know what he did here? He actually went against the law of man. They were expecting God to say, "No, don't give them the money. Don't give them the goods." But for the protection of the woman, God says, "Yeah, we're going to change that law. I say they are right. You're going to give them what belongs to them." That was new, by the way. The women are right, says God. They are not inferior to you. Give them what belongs to them. The Mosaic law did not only bring man to his right and respectable place of one created in the image of God, but it puts a great emphasis on the protection of the woman, as Jesus did in his words. He emancipated the woman. Women were now, when he came, were not able to go to a Bible study. Not so with the Pharisees. So in Deuteronomy 25, 5-16, the man still had the choice not to marry the woman, but at what cost? It was better for him to marry. And following this law, Deuteronomy speaks much of the sanctity of the marriage. This is something that is very important. And some of these laws may appear very harsh. Just see one verse, Deuteronomy 22:21. This is the case where a man finds out that his fiancée had an affair. After complaining to the leaders, they lapidate the woman. It says, "Then they shall bring out the young woman to the door of her father's house, and the man in her city shall stone her to death with stones, because she has done a disgraceful thing in Israel to play the harlot in her father's house. So you shall put away the evil among you." You know, the best commentary of this law is, where do you find this? In Mary and Joseph. Do you remember? When she was found with child, Joseph thought that she had committed fornication, as we see it here in Deuteronomy 22:21. And before Gabriel, the angel, came to him, we can see that a great man of God that this man was. In Matthew 1:19, it says, "Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man, and not wanting to make her a public example," he didn't use the law, right? "Was minded to put her away secretly." He really thought she committed a fornication. And what he thought that the circumstances indicated that something went wrong, being a fine man, he didn't want to harm Mary. You see, that teaches us also that the punishments of the law, we didn't have to apply them. Right? Here we see a man full of love. He would have had the right to make a public business of it all, but he abstained himself, and right there, Gabriel came and appeared to him. Again, it shows that the punishments, above the punishments, there was something much higher, right? Love and grace. Love and grace. What the Messiah would be. Also, as for Mary, we can see that this woman was truly a woman of God. Just before, when the angel of Gabriel came to her to announce her that she was going to be pregnant by the Spirit of God, she completely relied on God, right? She knew that she could have been accused of fornication. Based on this verse, she knew she could have been lapidated, excommunicated, but she had so much faith in God. She says, whatever is right, I will do it. It is very right in you. However, there's also in this section what we learn about divorce. But here again, a very interesting and exceptional case is presented to us about divorce. We're going to close with this. Look at Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 to 4. See what it says. By the way, this is very complicated, but there's much truth in here. It says, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and put in her hand and send her out of his house. When she has departed from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies or who took her as his wife, then the former husband who divorced her must not take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled. For that is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. So we are presented with an unusual case scenario. So strange that I believe there's some kind of irony here. First, we read that the woman finds no favor in the eyes of the husband because he says he saw some kind of uncleanness. It doesn't say what it is because it seems that at this time they had their own range of definition as so to favor the man. It was not adultery, because if it was adultery, then it would be death penalty. So the idea here is that marriage must not be considered as a simple relationship based on the husband's feeling. Marriage is for life. It is not in the hands of the moods of a husband or a wife for that matter. It is a divine institution. Second, we read that the man must put her out of the house. But is not this both their house? This is what marriage is, 50-50. Third, as the confusion keeps its course, the woman marries another. Did not God say that in marrying they have become one flesh, and here the flesh is abnormally separated? Fourth, there's another bill of divorcement, another putting away. One is not enough. When in the world are you going to find such a situation like this? The ridiculousness of the situation shows how the marriage institution was reduced to. And so I believe that the scriptures give this example to amplify the measure of confusions that surrounded this great institution. And the law was here to put it back in its place. In this example, again, the woman is seen as the mercy of the man and the society in general. Here the marriage stands on man's feeling, but the Spirit of God does not leave us with this sad example. I want you to read verse 5. Here he tells us what a healthy marriage should be. It says, when a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go out to war or be charged with any business. He shall be free at home for 1 year. That's very generous, by the way. And see what it says. And bring happiness in his wife, whom he has taken. So first, marriage is so important that God gives a full year of vacation to the one who marries. Next, in contrast to man's feeling in verse 1, where the marriage stood on his favor, here God tells us what he ought to do instead. He said he should bring happiness in the life of his wife. This is biblical marriage. This is what God instructed us. It is in verse 5 where God tells the man how he should behave towards his wife. Man should not seek his own happiness, but his wife's happiness. This is the law of Christ. This is why we are told 4 times in the New Testament that husbands should love their wives. Likewise, a woman should not seek her happiness, but the one of her husband. These make godly marriages and allow the Spirit to work in the couple. It is sad to see how such a high institution is made so chaotic even today. This whole section could be summed up by what God said through Malachi. I hate divorce, he says. I hate divorce. Malachi 2:16. And so to conclude today's study, there's a phrase that comes back many times in this exposition of the law. One that is repeated 9 times from chapter 13 to 25. We see it in Deuteronomy 19:19. See what it says. then you shall do to him as he thought to have done to his brother, so you shall put away the evil from among you.